All right. I should be live. Who knows? But if I am live and you can hear me and see me, please let me know in the chat. And thanks for being here on another Monday night currently. And I'm going to give you some hypothetical scenarios to consider regarding our upcoming election cycle because, well, there's just a lot of concerning things regarding that now, isn't there? So I do see some good people in the chat tonight. We got Gen X Gemini, Tack the Squirrel, Vanessa Stoller is here as well. We have Hugo. Can see me 5x5 coming in from Harbor Prepper. Dave Sickles with the good evening. LNC says Gunslinger. So I think we're pretty good here. It looks like we can get rolling. But while people are still clamoring to get in, we'll go ahead and say that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. And thanks to them, I can do live streams like this one free of charge, right? But also they have a lot of awesome preparedness equipment, which I get to experience. So a big thanks to Midway USA. And of course, the live streams themselves are specifically sponsored by magicprepperbeef.com. So if you're looking for shelf-stable, long-term survival beef, that's high-quality sous vide ribeye, New York strip, or filet mignon, this is good stuff. It is, however, expensive. So if you use the code MAGICPREPPER, you'll get 15% off your order. This is to supplement an already existing pantry. If you're new to prepping, this is not for you. You're not wanting to spend the kind of money that this requires to get this type of product. But if you have a good, robust pantry already and you want some luxury items to add to it for, your post-apocalyptic dining situation, then this is a good place to go. So magicprepperbeef.com, code magicprepper, 15% off. Big thanks to them for helping me do the live streams like this one. So now that more people are in and we can just kind of get going, I hope you had a good Labor Day. I apologize I wasn't able to make it last week, but you know what? I've got a family and we've got a lot of stuff going on, and I have to prioritize that. So I'm sure all of you understand, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way when it comes to how you have to prioritize your time, and I appreciate all of your understanding, and I appreciate you all being here right now. So let's get things rolling. Palm Tree P says, hate all of the selling of stuff. Let's get to the chat. Well, I apologize that this free conversation for you is a little bit too much when it comes to having some advertisements. However, I do try my best to make them relevant to preparedness. But if you'd like, I could switch to Raid Shadow Legends and make a lot more money. So let me know how that goes for you. But I also saw you chatting earlier about how we won't be involved in a war. And the funny part about that is that we already are. We're just not talking about it publicly like it's, public knowledge. So just be aware of that. But I appreciate the feedback regardless, because criticism is important for self-development. Now, right now we have some changes happening in the Middle East. And I thought that you should be aware of this because we've talked about this previously on the channel, where anytime you see carrier strike groups start heading towards a certain location, it gives you at least some sort of a notification that things are starting to heat up in that region. And we talked about a while ago that a red alert or call sign to this war actually escalating into a hot kinetic war with us involved directly would be the arrival of 2 or 3 carrier groups in the Middle East region, which is what we're seeing right now. So if number 3 shows up, you know it's on. But right now we're up to 2. So this is from August 27th, 2024. And in case you're new here, we go over things that have happened over the previous week. And if they're older than that, it's because we're building context about other current events that are occurring right now. And of course, if you're on replay crew, make sure you check in because I appreciate you all always coming back to kind of hear what we talked about today. So this is from Axios. Mapped U.S. Russia's warships to Middle East and show of force to Iran. Approximate locations of U.S. Navy ships near the Middle East. So here's this map, which makes it a little bit easier to digest, I guess, but it is interesting when you start to really look at what's happening here. So in the Eastern Mediterranean, we have a submarine, 3 destroyers, and 3 amphibious ships. In the Gulf of Oman, we have 2 carriers and 8 destroyers, which is a pretty heavy presence. And then in the Red Sea, we have no known ships anymore, but it says that U.S. forces continue to monitor the Houthi activity there. Now, we have been patrolling in the Red Sea for quite some time, and things have changed in that department. So now we've basically left a lot of those cargo ships to their own accord, and we have now gone over to the Gulf of Oman in anticipation of this Iranian counterattack on Israel, which still has not occurred, which is surprising to me just based on how things have gone previously, but it also concerns me based on the fact that they may be waiting until new developments, let's just say. So this is problematic in the sense of where things are heading, but at the same time, this gives us kind of a roadmap as to what to expect here moving forward. The U.S. has positioned about 18 warships, including 2 aircraft carriers, in and around the Middle East as it seeks to deter Iran and its proxies from conducting attacks that could evolve into all-out war with Israel. The big picture, This is a frantic year for the U.S. Navy. Some of the vessels operating in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden have been combating the Iran-aligned Houthi rebels for months, while more Navy and Air Force assets are being brought in now as a show of force. In addition to 2 carrier strike groups now operating in the Middle East, an Air Force F-22 Raptor squadron has also already arrived in the region, and the USS Georgia, a guided missile submarine, is lurking nearby. Disclosing the location or destination of a submarine like the nuclear-powered USS Georgia is a rare and purposeful power move. Taken together, there are easily more than 500 Tomahawk missiles ready to attack Iran and more than 100 aircraft ready to defeat allies or to defend allies to respond. Notes Brian Clark, director of the Hudson Institute Center for Defense Concepts and Technology. So this is just me reminding you that when we see this level of deployment, it should at least make you aware that the probability of conflict in that region has grown, has become of a higher probability, right? So what's the reason behind that? Well, obviously, I think we know there are people within our own government who prefer the idea of being at war. It's kind of a perpetuality that we want to be part of, right? It's good for the military-industrial complex. So we know that there's war hawks within our current government that would love to see this actually kick off in a kinetic way. And we're starting to see the groundwork be laid for that right now, just kind of emulating what happened before the invasion of Iraq. And since that playbook worked pretty well for them, they'll probably try it again. David Klein, you should start making videos on quick hit and runs due to the rising tyrannical government. David Klein, although that sounds interesting, I'm not the guy to teach that kind of stuff because I don't have that level of background. And I also don't know how well received that would be depending on from whose position we're concerning ourselves with, like the people who run this platform, let's just say. So, but I appreciate the sentiment and I appreciate the super chat. Thank you so much. However, like I said, I don't have that background, so I don't necessarily consider myself someone worthy of teaching such a subject. So let's go ahead and talk about why we're probably about to go to war with Iran, or at least why they're laying the groundwork for it and how they're going to try to get public sentiment to be in agreement with it, as well as, getting morale to move in that direction. This is from the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, okay? And Deterring Iran's Dash to the Bomb. This was produced August 29th. So, just a few days ago, you can kind of see how all these things are being laid out in front of us right now. The Islamic Republic of Iran appears to be in the process of significantly advancing its nuclear weapons program in the coming weeks, while Americans are preoccupied with politics at home and Israel is busy battling Hamas and Hezbollah. Okay, now, here's what we really need to pay attention to, because Lindsey Graham got involved. And that should tell you quite a bit about the direction that things are heading in, since he loves the idea of going to this war. The concern that Iran may be in process of significantly advancing its nuclear program appears consistent with the classified report on Iran's nuclear weapons program issued by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in late July. It's also known as ODNI. On July 28th, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican South Carolina, described the classified ODNI report about Iran's nuclear program as stunning. Graham said the report made him very worried that Iran could use these 3 or 4 months before our election to sprint to a nuclear weapon, and warned, "We have to put them on notice. That cannot happen," Graham added. In a July 31st press conference, that after having viewed the DNI report, I believe it is a certainty that if we do not change course, Iran will be, in the coming weeks or months, possess a nuclear weapon. So, understand that Lindsey Graham is saying, if we don't change course, they will get a nuclear weapon. For many years, it's been said that Israel, as well as the United States, would prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon at all costs. And I think we all know what Lindsey Graham is alluding to here in the sense of do not change course. What course would that be? Not being in war with Iran? So the new course would be being directly in war with Iran. And I honestly believe that that is what they are trying to accomplish here. And here's a reason for why this new report was so concerning, apparently, according to this report. The unclassified version of the ODNI report on Iran's nuclear program, dated July 23rd, contains a deeply troubling change from both an analogous 2023 report and the Iran section of the annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community. The July report is missing the following sentence contained in the February 2024 report and nearly identically in the 2023 report. Iran is not currently undertaking the key nuclear weapons development activities necessary to produce a testable nuclear device. So basically they're saying because that line was removed from this most recent report, it's obvious that they are in fact taking the key development activities necessary to produce a nuclear weapon. So that's kind of the evidence for why they're letting us know we might need to do something there, right? Like you can see how they're staging things and getting everything ready for public sentiment, as well as for just pushing those who are in office right now to go along with the narrative that's required. I also want you to be aware of the fact that, good evening, South Florida DCL. I want you to be aware of the fact that Lindsey Graham, huge war hawk, right? Even though he considers himself, or at least publicly looks like an ally of Donald Trump, Trump is clearly someone who at least presents themselves as not wanting war, prefers to avoid war at any cost. And because of that, these people might be trying to make a power play or a move to push us into a conflict that will not be resolved by the time a new president could possibly be elected, in order to ensure that it occurs. This is something you should definitely be aware of, because not only would that benefit those who are invested in seeing us continually and perpetually be in a state of war, but it also could benefit those who are currently in power in this current administration, because war gives a lot of special powers to those who could wield them, right? So let's see here. And I also want to say, Kevin Brown, Lindsey Graham is there. Love, don't he help himself? Yeah, he is there. Don't worry, he's still around. Okay. Now, let's jump over here to kind of give you the layman's perspective of the similar ideology that's being pushed right now. Iran is closing in on nuclear weaponization. America and Israel need a strategy. This is from August 29th. So this is all happening right now. Like, this is a sudden renewal and a sudden push for why this is such a big deal, why you should be concerned about it, why it's going to lead to conflict. And you can just see the groundwork being laid before your very eyes. Okay. America and Israel have no Iran strategy. This is my conclusion after meeting with members of Congress and their staff, State Department workers, and Israeli political, intelligence, defense, and think tank leaders this month. The U.S. cannot deal with the gravity of the threat, and Israel has been waiting for the U.S. to take the lead. America needs an Iran strategy, because a nuclear Iran will lead to a regional nuclear arms race, in which every nation, from the Muslim Brotherhood-oriented Turks to Saudi Arabia to Egypt to Iranian-controlled Iraq, will want and find a way to get apocalyptic weapons. This is from The Hill. They are not sugarcoating it. They're definitely trying to ensure you understand why this is so important that we go to war with Iran. And the U.S. will definitely be drawn into any resulting war. If one of those weapons falls into the hands of a terrorist organization, it will be used to intimidate American political leaders. Terrorists do not need a ballistic missile. They can put nukes on container ships headed for the port of Baltimore, New York, New Orleans, Seattle, Miami, or Los Angeles, then set them off in international waters, shutting down the electrical grid for months, to say nothing of the supply chain, and terrorizing the whole country. Wow, that's pretty specific. I mean, it's not inaccurate. Those are things that are definitely capable of being done, but I'm very interested in how they got to this specific conclusion of why this would be the exact play, especially the whole international waters thing mixed with shutting down the electrical grid. I mean, okay, The Hill. Perhaps this is an overreaction, but it is a genuine possibility. Yet we choose to ignore the zealotry of jihadists in Tehran, in bunkers in Gaza, in Beirut, and in the hideouts of Al-Qaeda and ISIS leaders in Syria, Iraq, and Pakistan. So this is what they're pushing for. And of course, Israel is already in this conflict with Iran. And of course, we are self-proclaimed to be Israel's greatest ally. So because of that, there's really no reason to believe we won't be in a war with Iran at any point here. And whether or not it's provoked by us or provoked by them or whoever strikes first or whatever happens here, all of this is being laid out before you by the media to ensure that you're aware as to why this is happening, why it needs to happen, and why it needs your public support. So just be aware of that, because this push is becoming very strong right before we have our election. And I think that there's some reasons behind that. Okay. And I think, good evening, Brent. Good to see you as well. I think that there's more to consider there than just the fact that the war machine would like to crank out more profits, right? There's more to the equation than just that. The Roaming Prepper. Hello, Magic Prepper. My work schedule had me asleep early. So glad I caught you tonight. Well, I'm glad you're here as well. Thanks for hanging out. I really appreciate it. Annie Oakley. Thanks, MP, and a big thanks to all our vets. Well, thank you, Annie Oakley. I appreciate that very much. And of course, we all appreciate our vets as well. So here is something for you to consider, because look, it's been pretty clear for quite some time that a conflict with Iran has been on the dossier, right? We don't know when exactly it's going to happen. We don't know how or who will be involved, if it will turn into a proxy situation similar to what we're seeing in Eastern Europe right now, or if it will be direct conflict. Regardless, what is happening is the setup is being put together so that it can occur. And then when you start to mix that with the current U.S. elections and the turmoil and vitriol surrounding that entire scenario, you can kind of see why, especially those who are in power right now, would like to see a war break out before that happens. So let's talk about some current scenarios that are occurring. Then let's talk about some concerns that are happening right now in the U.S. regarding this whole election situation. And then we can kind of think about how all this connects, right? Because I do believe there is a connection when it comes to all these events occurring suddenly at this point in time, right? It's not coincidental. The world is too well linked together. There's too much cohesion when it comes to global economies at this point in time for things to always just be coincidental, right? All right. You know, if you drink coffee at night, you're probably a crazy person, and that's why you're one of us. So, just so we're all aware, what's happening in Ukraine when it comes to their elections? A quick reminder, right? This is from May 21st. This is not recent, but this is just a reminder to build context as we move forward in this conversation, okay? As Ukrainian president's term officially ends during martial law, Constitutional Court may be asked to rule on timing of future elections. This is not long, but it's just a good reminder as to how things are going there, right? And how we can apply that to some of our thought process about what could occur here. And I'm not saying this will occur here. I'm saying that things of this nature are occurring right now, which should give you something to consider when it comes to your own locale, regardless of if you're in the US, the UK, or wherever you might be. And we are going to talk about other places like the UK tonight as well. Vladimir Zelensky's 5-year term as Ukraine's president formally ended, I'll fix the article for our current time period, on May 20th. An election would normally have been held in late March, but the parliament postponed the vote as the country is still at war and under martial law. But a major question remains for Ukrainians. Who might succeed Zelensky once he leaves office? Ukrainian legal experts consulted by DW said they expected Zelensky would remain in power until a new president is elected. The Ukrainian constitution states this clearly, said Andriy Mahera of the Center of Policy and Legal Reform in Kiev. The president does not automatically lose his powers 5 years after inauguration. These powers are only removed when the newly elected president takes office, i.e. after elections. So that is what's happening there, right? So that got me to thinking, and this is going to be not necessarily hypothetical, but it's going to be a little exercise to kind of give you some ideas about what could happen, because I think that's important for us to speculate on in these uncertain times. When things are uncertain, you can't just certainly know exactly what's going to happen, right? So we at least have to know what the options are, what the possible outcomes are, to be aware of what could lead into that particular scenario. So, OG Brick 420, crazy was in my 20s. I'm 40-something now. All right, well, you know what? You're still on the team. We still like you. I'm sure you're more wise now, but you probably don't have regrets either. So I appreciate that about you. So I went ahead and went over to everybody's favorite new friend, ChatGPT, right? That was sarcasm in case anybody didn't notice and you don't know me very well. But this is just something I asked it because, well, AI is pretty plugged into the approved answers, and I wanted to give you the approved answers as to what this could look like just in case, okay? If a new president is not elected by the time the current president's term ends on January 20th, the process for handling this situation is outlined in the U.S. Constitution. Hey, ChatGPT knows the Constitution. That's good. According to the 20th Amendment of the Constitution, if the president-elect fails to qualify by the end of the current president's term, the vice president-elect would typically assume the role of acting president. If there is no vice president-elect available, the line of succession would come into play. The Speaker of the House is next in line, followed by the President pro tempore of the Senate. The sentence. It's something else, actually. And then the members of the cabinet in a specific order. However, in a situation where there is a complete absence of a president-elect or a vice president-elect, the responsibilities of the presidency would likely be assumed by the highest-ranking official available according to the presidential line of succession. All right, we all know what that is. No big surprise. But hold on. Is there a way this could work out in the current administration's favor? Probably. So it would be the vice president-elect, not the current vice president, I asked. Precedent, I guess. That must have been a spell check. Either way, that's what I asked ChatGPT. And this is the answer I got. Yes, you are right. If a new president has not been elected by January 20th, the 20th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution provides that the current vice president-elect would assume the role of acting president. Now, here's the fun part. However, if the vice president-elect is also not available or has not been elected, the line of succession would come into play. In such a case, the current vice president would continue to serve in their role until the situation is resolved. The Presidential Succession Act would determine the next official in line. And then it goes down the line of succession once again. So this is saying, right? This is telling me anyway, and this is ChatGPT, so you know who approved this message. But this is saying that if for some reason the president-elect and the vice president-elect weren't somehow elected or qualified at the time of election to serve, well, the vice president would then serve until the situation is resolved, right? Who's vice president right now? What would make a president-elect fail to qualify, I asked, because that's what it's saying would have to happen for this to occur. A president-elect might fail to qualify if they're unable to meet the constitutional requirements, such as not being a natural-born citizen, failing to reach the age of 35, or not having been a U.S. resident for at least 14 years. Additionally, if a president-elect is disqualified due to legal issues, such as being convicted of a serious crime or found ineligible due to other legal disqualifications, they would not be able to assume office. In such cases, the vice president-elect would step in or the presidential line of succession would be activated, which, according to the previous answer, means the current vice president would remain in power until the situation was resolved. So I found that very interesting because war opens up a lot of doors, and war also opens up a lot of emergency powers. And what we're seeing in Ukraine right now is that they've postponed their elections, and their president is just president until the newer president is elected. Whenever that happens, that's what their constitution says. Ours apparently says that even though the president has to leave on January 20th, if the other incoming president isn't necessarily qualified or can't be elected for some reason, or who knows what else happens, and the vice president-elect has the same problems, well, the current vice president will just handle things until the situation is resolved. What situation could that be? What would that look like? What would happen if a certain candidate was elected and won the majority vote and won the electoral vote and then was disqualified from actually entering office? What situation would occur then that would have to be resolved until, the vice president could finally step down? And just so happens that the vice president is also the current candidate running for president against this other person. So I'm just putting it out there because War Donkey says there is no U.S. president right now. Well, there is some truth to that because I have heard news sources actually start referring to Kamala Harris as still vice president, but asking her about important things that are happening right now as if she is the president. I find that very interesting. But regardless of that, and this isn't about your political ideology or the lines that you divide yourselves by or whatever it is. This is just what could happen regardless, right? Even if you're on the left and this happens, like, this is bad for you. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the country. And I'm pretty sure you're part of the country if you live here, so it's bad for you too. So just be aware of this because apparently that's the thing that could happen, right? And don't forget that there's a lot of things being put into place right now that could disqualify certain candidates from being able to actually take office. And the indictments just keep rolling. So I'm concerned about how this could look. You know who else is concerned? Business consultants, people who are worried about what could happen here. Now, this is from a company that is trying to sell a product. Let's be honest. They're trying to sell a service for helping people figure out how to harden their business to unrest, how to train their employees to deal with unrest scenarios, specifically for the 2024 U.S. election. And there was some interesting things in here that I thought were worth sharing, regardless of the fact of this article mainly trying to be a piece of marketing for this company, right? Which this company does have some interesting services that I would consider looking into just for out of curiosity, because they have training programs for employees about what to do or what not to do based on certain circumstances of unrest and everything else. And I think that could be interesting because there might be some good information in there. But regardless, I found this article worth sharing because there's some really interesting data points in here. And I actually will share this article in the description And I also will post it in the live chat right now in case you're interested in checking it out, because there's a little bit more to it than what we can go over in this conversation. And then there's also the possibility of checking out some of those resources if you want for yourself. I'm not affiliated with this company at all. I don't even know they exist until I stumbled upon this today, but I wanted to share it, okay? Security professionals are warning of the potential of widespread rioting and civil unrest in the lead up to and aftermath of the 2024 U.S. election, with political violence posing a substantial business disruption risk. Civil disorder has accompanied the past 2 U.S. presidential election cycles, from rioting at anti-Trump demonstrations in 2016 to the storming of the Capitol building on January 6th. Conditions for further electoral violence are high in 2024, and business leaders should be paying attention, right? Okay, we all agree with that. We know things can get weird around here. They have all these different metrics and everything else, right? How can it impact your business? But here's where things start to get really interesting. Where is rioting likely to take place, okay? So here is a map that shows rioting and unrest after January 6th, right? And so let's give you some ideas about where these events are most likely to occur based on your location. So, if you're in Arizona, you know that those 2 different areas are hot spots, right? If you're where I am in North Dakota, we don't even have what's considered a hot spot in the entire state. So I thought this was cool just to kind of give you an idea of like what's nearby, like what to expect. So this is like the J6 people who are upset. Okay, then we can scroll down and actually look at the 2020 Summer of Love riots and find out who was upset about that and how much more widespread that was in comparison and how much larger these events were and where they took place in comparison as well. Because, here we have stuff happening all over different parts of the country, but if you compare it to the next map, there's things that are happening in other places that didn't happen at all during the previous map, right? So these are very interesting data points to me. This one here specifically talks about left versus right and the different demonstrations that were mainly driven by those 2 ideologies. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff in here that I think is worth considering. I mean, this is an entire map talking about the different amounts of bomb threats to state capitals, court buildings, and police departments, as well as specific businesses throughout this previous year. A lot of good information in here, a lot of things worth considering. Now, here's something I thought was kind of interesting. What can you do to prepare for political violence? Now, this is in the context of a business, but the information can easily be applied to a person, especially since here in the United States, we consider a corporation to be an individual, right? So when you take this information and apply it to yourself, you can see that it's still relevant, and I found it to be worth sharing because it's specifically concerned about unrest during the 2024 election, and it's something that we can actually apply to our own preparedness purposes, okay? Begin with an audit of your existing procedures and resilience measures. How would they cope with any of the anticipated threats to your organization? How prepared are your employees at all levels? Change employees for family members, okay? And then keep applying it that way. For political unrest, what kind of training have your executive leaders, site management teams, and staff gone through for crisis situations? What risk control measures or business continuity and emergency management plans do you have in place? How quickly can you deploy them across the organization in the event of a crisis? You can see how this is very good work to do in the sense of an exercise for yourself when you're trying to audit your own home and your own immediate family and what it is you're capable of during a time like this. And this is one of their virtual programs here that kind of shows you, you're in a city traveling by taxi to a meeting, then people start moving by foot towards the town square. Things look bad in the sense of being a rally. And then you start kind of clicking on like the different things that you can react to in sense of, the level of risk and everything else. So that's why I thought this training thing could be actually interesting, even though, like I said, this article in many ways is just to generate more marketing for a business they're trying to run. But I thought that the information there was still worth sharing, especially in the sense of, doing a self-audit of your company, which for you is either a mutual assistance group, a community, maybe it's your congregation, or maybe it's just your immediate family. And are your employees trained and ready to deal with what could occur during this election cycle? Perfect. All right. John Carchia, Magic, can you do a video on the Colorado situation? I did already. So if you didn't see it, just go on my channel and check it out because I jumped on that whole situation pretty quickly. And the video is doing very well, and I hope that it gets spread out a little bit more if possible. But just be aware, because of the amount of attention that entire scenario is gaining right now, and because of the amount of social media infatuation with it, there's a lot of strange and probably misleading news about it happening right now going around, that you need to kind of put yourself mentally in a holding pattern to wait and see what actually develops rather than jumping on the hype train as to what's happening right now. Okay, just like that's just my personal advice. That's why I don't necessarily like put out a video in the immediate of learning about a new piece of information all the time. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump over to why this election could easily be so contentious. There's some concerning things going on with the election software. And election integrity is a big deal. But here's the thing. This can be used by either side, right? Don't think for a second that if the leverage would be better for the left to use in this situation, that they wouldn't use it, and vice versa for the right? Like either side would use this to their advantage if it becomes a real issue. And this is something that you should definitely be aware of because it's happening right now in the precursor to the actual elections. And I find that to be concerning, let's just say. So hacking blind spot. States struggle to vet coders of election software. In case you just want to jump right into it and not really worry about the minutia of all this, they found the Ukrainian national anthem inside of the coding of this software, right? That should tell you something. When election officials, oh, by the way, this is from September 1st, yesterday. So this is new information. When election officials in New Hampshire decided to replace the state's aging voter registration database before the 2024 election, they knew that the smallest glitch in election day technology could become fodder for conspiracy theorists. So they turned to one of the best and only choices on the market, a small Connecticut-based IT firm that was just getting into election software. Oh, just getting into it. What could go wrong? But last fall, as the new company WSD Digital raced to complete the project, New Hampshire officials made an unsettling discovery. The firm had offshored part of the work. That meant unknown coders outside of the U.S. had access to the software that would determine which New Hampshireites would be welcome at the polls this November. The revelation prompted the state to take a precaution that is rare among election officials. It hired a forensic firm to scour the technology for signs that hackers had hidden malware deep inside the coding supply chain. The probe unearthed some unwelcome surprises. Software misconfigured to connect to servers in Russia, and the use of open source code, which is freely available online, overseen by a Russian computer engineer convicted of manslaughter, according to a person familiar with the examination and granted anonymity because they were not authorized to speak about it. The company that conducted the scan, Reversing Labs, has also warned about those issues in a blog post and a talk at a hacking conference last year, though it did not specify the state and the vendor where the issues were found. New Hampshire officials say the scan revealed another issue. A programmer had hard-coded the Ukrainian national anthem into the database in an apparent gesture of solidarity with Kiev. None of the findings amounted to evidence of wrongdoing, I guess, the officials said, and the company resolved the issues before the new database came into use ahead of the presidential vote this spring, right? This just goes to show you why people are so concerned about the integrity of everything. The systems are obviously flawed. There's obviously a lot of security concerns, and these things aren't just magically repaired and fixed. Anyone who would have gone in there and put lines of code in, especially something like another nation's national anthem, could have easily, put in a back door, left a lot of malware and everything. Who knows what else is in there? All I'm trying to say is that clearly there are some real issues here that are going to make people believe that things are not as secure as they were told, right? And I think here in this community, we're very skeptical of just about everything because that's kind of part of being prepared, right? If I'm not skeptical of what's happening in the world, then I'm probably not worried about preparing for it either. So, of course, we're going to have a mindset that makes us believe, well, obviously this is happening. We already knew this was happening. But the fact that it's becoming mainstream and being presented to the people should also give you something else to consider. Why are they telling us about this now if it was fixed? And why are they trying to sow more of this uncertainty into the mainstream? Not just for you and me, but for the average consumer. And that is because, like I said, these things can be leveraged by either side of the political spectrum based on who it benefits the most. So if things go south for one side, maybe it's because of these problems. Vice versa, it easily can be used for the same thing. So these are considerations to be making. Dan the Crawl Daddy 96, $2, thanks, and get prepared. He says, I agree. And thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it, okay? Darth Duty Butt. See, during the SHTF is the time to collect silver and gold from desperate people who will trade an ounce of gold for a bag of rice. Then when it's over, you'll be rich. Well, that might have some validity to it. We don't know. But the thing is about SHTF is I'm not sure what's going to be the hot commodity, right? So it could be anything. It could be as simple as socks for all we know, but we just aren't fully sure of that quite yet. And the other thing is that you'd probably be overwhelmingly surprised by how few people actually own precious metals of any kind. And then that trading would likely result in just other stuff instead of something that would have a lot of value post any type of scenario. That's at least my opinion anyway. All right. So let's talk about more election interference situations. All right. And in case anybody's freaking out, I'm drinking out of a mug from a rock band. I get talked about the symbolism of it all the time, and I just literally don't even know what it is. So I just like music, and I bought a mug one time. It's fine. So in case you didn't know, Facebook just came out and was like, yeah, we did stuff we shouldn't have done during the pandemic, right? And this is kind of a big deal because not only is this an admission of guilt from social media that censoring as well as information suppression was part of the game plan during an election year. But we can apply it to what's happening in other places right now and understand that this is going to be a big, big problem for us here. Okay. And it is currently even right now, but it's going to get much worse. Zuckerberg says the White House pressured Facebook to censor some COVID-19 content during the pandemic. What, really? I'm so surprised. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg says senior Biden administration officials pressured Facebook to censor some COVID-19 content during the pandemic and vowed that the social media giant would push back if it faced such demands again. In a letter to Representative Jim Jordan, the Republican chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Zuckerberg alleges that the officials, including those from the White House, repeatedly pressured Facebook for months to take down certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire. The officials expressed a lot of frustration when the company didn't agree, he said in the letter. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it, Zuckerberg wrote in the letter dated August 26th and posted on the committee's Facebook page and to its account on X. The letter is the latest repudiation by Zuckerberg of efforts to target misinformation around the coronavirus pandemic during and after the 2020 presidential election, particularly as allegations have emerged that some posts were deleted or restricted wrongly. I also think we made choices that, with the benefit of hindsight and new information, we wouldn't make today, he said, without elaborating. We're ready to push back if something like that happens again. They definitely had an effect on the election, if you want to look at it that way. And Donald Trump apparently was very aware of it. And in his book, it was recently revealed that he would be willing to put Zuckerberg in prison if it was to happen again. Now, election interference is a big deal. And this should not be happening. But if the government were the ones who are pressuring Facebook to do these things, should Facebook go to jail or should people in the government be punished for treason? These are questions that I have because, sure, complying with an unconstitutional order might be a bad idea, but as a company, you generally try not to make enemies with the government that has the ability to ruin your business, right? And so maybe they were conflicted about what they should or should not do in that situation. Now, many of us would say, well, I would have done the right thing and allowed free speech and everything else, right? But that's easier said than done when you're also in cahoots with these people. So I'm not sure exactly how that should have been handled, but what I will say is that it's a problem, and I think the people who are pushing this level of compliance are the ones that we should be really considering for punishment versus the owner of a social media platform. That's just my opinion, right? And obviously, I think this guy probably needs to be looked at for something else regardless. So former President Donald Trump writes in a new book set to be published next week that Mark Zuckerberg plotted against him during the 2020 election and said the Meta chief executive would spend the rest of his life in prison if he did it again. It represents Trump's most recent attack on Zuckerberg, who he has repeatedly accused of intervening in the last presidential election. And it comes as Meta has taken steps to assure conservatives it will not influence this year's campaign. Listen, they did intervene in the last election, and Zuckerberg just acknowledged it. So that's a real accusation. It's legit. He admitted it. And just because some of the stuff they were concerning themselves with had to do with the pandemic doesn't mean that wasn't an election issue, right? That was still a very hot election issue during 2020. So this is happening now here in this country. It can get worse. And one thing that I guess I'm going to start kind of pushing on a little bit harder, right? So, for example, I've been talking about the threat of the open southern border and the possibility of criminal entities establishing themselves within our country and taking over communities with violence for actual years now. And now we finally have a wide open public example of it actually happening. So I don't play the I told you so game, but I am going to try to focus on things like that which are more likely to occur and something that I think needs more awareness about it in order to spread that awareness around this community. And one thing that I think we need to kind of remind ourselves of from time to time that maybe I didn't always assume needed to be said out loud, but I guess just should be kind of put out there more often as like a reminder, is that what's happening in places like the UK or Brazil or Venezuela, like a lot of these other places, right? Even if they're not Western countries, even if they're BRICS nations or anything else, a lot of the stuff that's happening is related to those who are in power here as well. And they get away with more in other places that don't have the checks and balances and the constitutional protections that we have in the United States. So when you see these things happening in these other places, you have to understand that not only are they testing what will occur if they do these things to a population, but they're also going to take those results and that data and then bring it back here whenever they have the capacity to do it in a way that seems fit, right? And especially here in the US, like if we were to lose our Second Amendment rights, then suddenly a lot of the things we're witnessing in other countries would start happening here almost immediately. And I have zero doubts about that. So, like these unarmed British cops coming up to people's homes to arrest their kid because they posted something mean on social media. You think that would happen in the United States when everybody's armed? No, like it just wouldn't. It just wouldn't. So like just keep that in mind, okay? But here's something that happened regarding social media as well. And this is something you should be very aware of. It could happen here just as easily. All the key considerations around X's ban in Brazil. In case you didn't know, X, what used to be called Twitter, which I'm never saying that again. I'm so sick of that. You know what it was. You know what it is now. Let's just stop. Okay, X is now banned in Brazil. Brazil is like no more X, right? Do you think that's because they didn't like how the platform was operating, or do you think it's because of misinformation or think? No, it's because it was a place for the people who didn't agree with what the government was doing to talk to each other and to share why they didn't agree with what the government was doing. And now the government said they don't need X anymore. Wow, big surprise. So I want to just give you this information so you can consider it for what could happen here in the future. So X has now been banned in Brazil after refusing to comply with Brazilian court orders to remove the accounts of 7 anti-government commentators, which it claims have contributed to ongoing unrest in the region. Though the actual specifics here are in question, with X itself claiming that it hasn't been given enough information to justifiably action this request, which is why it's decided to oppose the court order. And as of right now, at least, it doesn't seem like the two sides will be coming to a compromise anytime soon. Here's an overview of the key consideration in X's Brazilian ban. Back in April, the Brazilian Supreme Court ordered X to comply with government orders to suppress certain accounts, which Brazilian leadership determined to have been spreading false reports and hate speech. Where have we heard that before? X refused to action the request, saying that it was not legal under Brazilian law and also not within its new free speech aligned moderation approach. The case has gone back and forth over the last few months, but then 2 weeks back, under threat of arrest for our local staff due to its failure to comply, X decided to shut down its Brazilian office and evacuate its employees. Brazilian authorities then demanded that X nominate a legal representative in the region, and upon failing to do so, because that representative would also have been arrested. The entire platform was then suspended from operating in Brazil last week. Okay. Now, this all stems from a seemingly unfounded claims that the 2022 Brazilian election was rigged. What? There's no way that could be why this is happening. No. After the results were announced for the 2022 poll, former President Jair Bolsonaro, who lost the count, claimed that the electronic ballot machines had been hacked. What? That's impossible. That wouldn't have happened in New Hampshire. And no one would have put the Ukrainian national anthem into any electronic related voting machines, right? And the result was then unjustly weighted against him. Bolsonaro's claims resonated with his supporters, and much like the January 6th riots in the U.S., Bolsonaro's supporters also staged protests, which saw Brazil's Congress, presidential palace, and Supreme Court subject to attack. Okay. Over 300 people were arrested as a result, while Bolsonaro, who fled Brazil shortly after the poll, has since been banned from running for office for 8 years for undermining Brazilian democracy with his false claims. The 7 X accounts identified in the Brazilian Supreme Court's request are all associated with Bolsonaro's regime and have all refused to accept the results of the 2022 poll. The concern then appears to be that these accounts are continuing to contribute to unrest and dissent by maintaining such claims. So, do you think that this could happen here? They literally are comparing what happened there to J6, right? They're comparing the two scenarios. So obviously the precedent is already there, but just in a different country, right? So, and just in case you guys don't know, I have been posting more on X because I think that it might be somewhere that more conversation is happening, and it might be somewhere where I can network and communicate with people more frequently in a shorter format that's less time consuming. So if you want to follow me on X, I am on X, and I am just Magic Prepper, and I've got the logo, and you'll know it. And I'm not verified yet because I just haven't paid for that because, I just didn't feel like I needed to right away, but I am on there. So if you want to follow me there, feel free, because I might start posting some stuff over there too. And yeah, I'm on Instagram, and I'm also on YouTube in case you didn't know. So, but bad things are happening in other places too. What about the UK? What are they doing? Nothing bad, I'm sure. The original OSOC says X is popping. Gen X Gemini, I rarely check it, but I follow you there. Well, I appreciate that. I really do appreciate it. So, all right. The UK is just, oh, man. Listen, we have some great community members here from the UK. There are some great people who are part of this community that live over there. I just can't imagine dealing with some of the stuff they're dealing with right now. It is really just out of control. It's so dystopian. It's science fiction to the worst degree. But that's what they're dealing with. So I'm worried about this being the testing grounds for what they want to implement here eventually. Why? Because it's all the same people, right? We know that. The bankers are the bankers of everywhere. They don't just bank here or there, right? UK Starmer says things will get worse before they get better. That's so hope-inspiring. So glad we're so optimistic, right? Starmer vowed to rebuild the fabric of British society after anti-migrant riots. I know the media keeps saying that, but I don't necessarily, at least from my understanding, think that that's exactly what the riots are about. It sounds more along the lines of the citizenry being abandoned by its government rather than it just being anti-migrant. So I clearly know there's a narrative here when it comes to the media trying to portray this a certain way. But when the people's interests are no longer protected by their elected government, then what's the point of the government, right? And that's what the people are understanding of right now. At least that's what it seems like to me. I don't live there, so I don't know. Feel free to let us know if you are there and you have a different opinion. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Tuesday it would take a long time to rebuild Britain and rid it of the rot, he says, took hold under the previous Conservative government, warning things will get worse before they get better. Those are strong words. Trying to get rid of the rot. And he's specifically talking about a large group of people who live there. Not just the government that used to be in charge, but literally he's talking about the citizens. Starmer, elected in July in a landslide victory, has vowed to rebuild the fabric of British society, saying this month's anti-migrant riots reflected the divisions that built up during the Conservative Party's 14 years in power. He made his speech in the Rose Garden at Downing Street, where former Prime Minister Boris Johnson held one of many parties during COVID lockdowns, events that Starmer said shattered the trust between the public and its politicians, which I actually agree with, because we saw a lot of that here in the U.S. as well. Oh, lockdown, shut your business down. Sorry you lost your house, not our problem. Oh, P.S., my friends are coming into town, so we're going to go to a nice winery and have a dinner, even though you're not allowed to be open. Great. Yeah, I think I can actually relate to that a little bit. We have inherited not just an economic black hole, but a societal black hole. And that is why we have to take action and do things differently. Part of that is being honest with people about the choices we face and how tough this will be. Oh, well, that sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Frankly, things will get worse before we get better. Oh, great. That's what everyone wants to hear when things are already on fire and there's widespread riots throughout your country, but they got to get worse than that. Okay, good to know. Addressing an audience of people he met during this year's election campaign, such as apprentices, teachers, nurses, and small business owners, Starmer said change would not happen overnight. But speaking a week before Britain's parliament returns from a summer break, he said his government was determined to tackle a multitude of problems, ranging from overflowing prisons to a shortage of housing and long waiting lists for health services. I wonder if that is the byproduct of socialism. So, all overflowing prisons, well, arresting every single person who posts something you don't like on social media is probably a big part of that problem. And then the shortage of housing is probably because of immigrating tens of thousands of millions of people to your country without having any type of infrastructure prepared for it. And then, and let's not forget that the long waiting list for health services when healthcare is government provided. Wow, I wonder if that has anything to do with it. The former director of public prosecutions was forced to cancel his summer holiday this month to tackle far-right riots. So sorry that he had to cancel his vacation. It's so unfortunate. That targeted Muslims and migrants. The riots began after the killings of 3 young girls in northern England was wrongly blamed on a Muslim migrant based on online misinformation. So, which, by the way, that's this article saying that, not me. Anyway, what else is going on in the UK? And the reason we're going over this is because, well, what can we expect here possibly? Well, that was a lovely freeze frame right there. So lovely. And I don't know what's happening with that. It's not my internet or anything tonight. It's literally my PC is just kind of freaking out a little bit. So maybe I got to clear up some memory on it or something. I don't know. Either way, okay. Robert Larson, it's a choice. It's not easy, but you can move. Well, agreed, but man, one thing I will say, Robert, is that when you're in a very difficult situation and you live somewhere that's already authoritarian and having a lot of these dystopic issues, they make it difficult for you to leave on purpose, right? So I'll give you a quick example. I have friends who moved to San Francisco back in the day because they just thought it was going to be amazing, right? And once I got there, rent was super high, cost of living was super high. And they said, well, we don't really need our car because we don't really drive anywhere, right? So we can just take public transportation or walk. And yeah, it's fine. It's a lot of money that we don't need to be spending. So we'll just get rid of our car. So that's what they did. And then they're still broke. That didn't actually help them when it came to their finances. And then when they finally decide they need to leave because it's getting dangerous and it's getting gross and things are not working out in the sense of having a good quality of life, they can't leave because they don't even have a vehicle now. And they definitely can't afford to get a vehicle. And so that cycle happens over and over and over again in some of these areas because they make it so difficult for you to even get by that you can't even leave. And I'm not saying that's everybody, but I definitely know that is a struggle people face, right? So one thing I will say is that England, oh my gosh, my computer right now is just driving me nuts. What are you doing? I'm not happy with this. Hold on. Let me get through. We're going to get there, I promise. Wow. Hopefully we can come back. And look, I'm frozen right now on my side. I don't know if I am on your side. So let me know if I am or not so I can figure out what I got to do here. But this is not going well right this second. Are we done now? Plus, my freeze frame on my side is hilarious. So, well, let's see here. There's ways around this. And if for some reason I'm not frozen, I'm just going to keep going in hopes that things are going the way they're supposed to. Otherwise, I'm just going to jump over to my channel real quick and pull out the phone and just make it happen that way if I have to. Okay. Okay. Looks like I'm alive. I just can't see anything happening on my PC. So we're just going to set my phone here. There we go. How am I still going? This is crazy. All right. Honestly, though, like my screens are all frozen on my PC. And that's where I'm sharing the stream. Am I back? We're doing it. No matter what happens, we're doing it. Okay. Everyone needs to be aware. We're doing it either way. And I'm not going to just let this fail. All right. I think I am back. I think we made it. Hey, 5x5's coming in. There we go. And if you're on replay, crew, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for getting through that little tissy, we'll just call it. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of people because of that whole debacle, which is unfortunate because there is some good information I was hoping to continue to share here that I just wasn't able to. So give me 1 second. We will move forward here. Looks like we're good, though. Okay. All right. I'm back. Testing out the live chat just to verify. Cool. And my phone, at least gave me that inclination that things were working to a degree. So that was good. Now, let's talk about, maybe UK didn't want me to share this. What are Blade Runners? Okay. This is the kind of stuff I expect to see here eventually. The ads are out of control right now. The moment masked Blade Runner vigilante hacks London ULEZ camera to the ground using electric saw in protest against Sadiq Khan's hated £1,250 a day driver tax. Okay. Now, what's happening here is that basically in a low emission zone, they're trying to charge certain vehicles that don't meet the requirements £12.50 a day. I don't even know how to say that. 12 pounds and 50, penance a day? I don't care. Either way, people are pissed about it. So they're chopping down these cameras. But they're not just chopping down these cameras just for the whole low emission vehicle situation. They're doing it for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, is because it's not just the ULEV cameras that are being targeted, but the UK is using facial recognition to hunt rioters from these riots that have been going on over there. Okay. This should be an expectation of yours here in the United States at any point in time as things move forward. And it's your job as a prepared person who might be involved in some sort of unrest scenario or who knows what, right? Think of it this way. Not everyone who went to the Capitol on J6 was there or involved with a lot of the stuff that was happening, right? But those people still found themselves interviewed by the FBI. So what I'm trying to say here is that this reminds us that this technology will be used against you and that you should be prepared for how to deal with it or how to mitigate it. And I'm just going to say this flat out just so some of you can kind of stash away in your prepared mindset here. If you're ever going to do anything that has a questionable risk to it, and that might involve some sort of problematic encounter at some point in time thereafter, you should probably not bring your phone, right? You should probably not do that. You should, at the minimum, if you need communication for some reason, have a burner phone, right? But stop bringing your phone places where you might find yourself dealing with a risky scenario. I think that's a good way to put that. London, in the battle to bring calm to British streets, authorities are playing both sides of technology, employing facial recognition software to hunt suspects, while at the same time considering restrictions on social media the government claims has been used as an organizing tool for rioters. Do you guys think, and I'm just going to throw this out there, do you think that our founding fathers here in the United States, when they were throwing all that tea into the harbor, do you think that they would have been considered rioters? Do you think that the British government at the time would have liked to disrupt their ability to organize? If they had a tool of organization, do you think they would have targeted it? Do you think that if they had the ability to, I don't know, recognize these people, right, and find out who they were at face value that were complicit in the crime of dumping the tea, that they would have prosecuted them or tried to arrest them? These are all considerations to make now because this is all happening again in a strange way. Officers are feeding photographs of suspects through Scotland Yard's newly updated face matching program, which has been under consideration for London's 2012 games. Or since London's 2012 games, I have to assume is what they mean there, right? So just be aware that this is all happening. But here we are. Okay, now let's talk about another possible scenario that could occur during an election. Okay. The original Osage. Yes, that's why they dressed up as Indians. Exactly. That is exactly what happened there. And that's, don't know how else to say it. Disguises were used. And just so you guys know, those Blade Runners over in the UK also wear disguises. They wear utility worker vests and all kinds of stuff. And they'll go up and pretend that they're working maintenance on some of these items. And next thing you know, they don't work anymore. So just be aware of that. This is a real thing. So Venezuela. The government blames sabotage as capital city faces major power outage. This is also an expectation I have for an election cycle here in the U.S. They have been predicting white nationalist right-wing extremism targeting our power grid for years now. They just keep bringing it up, right? And so if anything needed to happen to change direction regarding the election itself, whether or not that was to implement some sort of emergency or to dissuade people from being able to actually come out and vote or whatever it would be. If any level of power outage were to happen during that time, we know who's going to get the blame regardless of validity of it, right? So just be aware of that. But in Venezuela, this just happened, August 30th. A huge nationwide power outage happened. And just to give you the quick rundown, basically, the majority of the country's power comes from a hydroelectric dam that was attacked, but they haven't given us any additional information on it, okay? Venezuelans awoke Friday to a major power outage in the capital, Caracas, and several states. President Nicolas Maduro's government blamed the outage, which it said began around 4:50 a.m., on electrical sabotage. Freddy Nanez, the communications minister, said officials were working to restore power. Nobody will take away our peace and tranquility of the Venezuelan people, he wrote in a message shared with journalists on Telegram. Okay, and just be aware that the grid relies heavily on the Guri Dam, a giant hydroelectric power station that was inaugurated in the late 1960s. The electrical system has been burdened by poor upkeep, a lack of alternative energy supplies, and a drain of engineering talent, as an estimated 8 million Venezuelan migrants have fled economic misery in recent years. Oh, only 8 million Venezuelans? Well, that couldn't cause us any problems here in the U.S., right? But just be aware, electrical sabotage is definitely part of the program. And that dam is the majority of their power, and it was able to be attacked. So don't rule that out as a possibility. And just as a quick little note here, we recently seized Maduro's airplane. So listen, Nicolas Maduro, regardless of our thoughts on him when it comes to, from the United States standpoint, what happens in their country is happening in their country, right? If this guy was legitimately elected or not, that doesn't necessarily mean we get to decide otherwise, which is what we've been trying to do. And this type of activity, right? This looks like the lead up to something like what happened in Libya, right? Economic hitmen go in, They topple a government. They install a new regime that's democratically friendly to the United States and the Western powers, and then they abandon it and let it dissolve slowly into chaos and civil war. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like that happen in Venezuela at some point in time soon here, in all honesty, because this is just kind of like I don't know. It just reminds me of one of those kind of red flags of like, hey, this is unusual activity that's happening right now and getting us closer to that possible action being taken. So it's something worth noting. The Dassault Falcon 900EX aircraft was illegally exported from the United States and used for the benefit of Maduro and his representatives. People are considering that this was like the Air Force One of Venezuela. So imagine if this were to happen to our Air Force One while it was in another country, right? Like this is definitely, it's above and beyond the usual activities done by the United States, let's just say. This morning, the Justice Department seized an aircraft we allege was illegally purchased for $13 million through a shell company and smuggled out of the United States for use by Nicolas Maduro and his cronies, said Attorney General Merrick B. Garland. The department will continue to pursue those who violate our sanctions and export controls to prevent them from using American resources to undermine the national security of the United States. Look, I'm not saying it was right or wrong. I'm saying it is an additional data point in our march towards, well, at least in Venezuela, a destabilization campaign that eventually leads to a democratically friendly elected official taking office that we can negotiate with a little bit more calmly. Oh, and you know what's so strange? Every time there is some sort of economic hitman type scenario that occurs in the world, it always happens in oil-rich countries. It always happens where there's a lot of natural resources. So I don't know if there's any correlation there, but it's just something that I like to think about. Listen, hello, MacBean Scottish Fitness. Good to see you. I'm sorry that the live stream got a little weird tonight. I wasn't necessarily expecting my computer to freeze up on me. It's usually been a pretty good computer. It's got some decent hardware. But you know what? I might need to free up some space on it, give it a little bit of a maintenance, let's just say. And hopefully next week we won't have those problems. But that's the information I wanted to provide you with this week. I think it's pretty clear we are on our way to a war with Iran. I think it's pretty clear. We have all of the assets in the area right now. Right. And if we compare it to the Gulf War, like we have enough aircraft carriers in that region right this second to begin a war. But if a third one shows up, it's like all bets are off. Like you should not be surprised if number 3 shows up, that just means like we're already in it. So keep that in mind. I'm not saying it would affect us directly here other than our soldiers and troops being put in harm's way, which is problematic in many ways. But what I'm trying to say is that it will affect the economy. It will affect a lot of other things, especially a administration that would then have wartime powers and then would apply for emergency powers and then would maybe have the reasoning and self-righteous justification to change the way the election turns out, let's just say. Okay? So let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you check in if you're on Replay Crew. Thank you so much for your patience tonight. These things happen whenever you're live. Things can just occur. So I do the best I can, and I appreciate your understanding. Anything else you need from me at all, you guys go to magicpepper.com. If you are a channel member or part of the Subscribe Star page, you can be in the private live stream, which starts at 9:15 Central Standard Time tonight. And that is going to be just a casual conversation where we hang out. And it's my way of saying thank you for directly supporting the channel. I'll put the Subscribe Star link in the live chat and in the description. It's $5 a month, but it is a way to support me directly while also getting some exclusive content, possible preparedness incentives, and having direct access in the sense of communication. Or if you want to, you can join a channel membership for less money and get into the private live streams, and that's always a good time as well. If you want to be part of that tonight, the private live stream link is on the feed page on your Subscribe Star, as well as on the community tab on my channel page for members. Thank you all so much. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. Keep prepping. Things are getting weird, and we just never know when it's going to really get crazy. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper. I'll do it.